Hello and welcome. We are so excited to welcome you to Living Cities Earth experience. Please enjoy the next few minutes, and we hope that this video and the ideas from our speakers will change your life to the better. Listen carefully. What particularly talks to you? What might have a chance to change your life and lives of people around you? Also, life of your place and our planet. We believe that you, the leaders of positive change, are those who define the future. So let's work together. And thank you for coming. To them right now, because I want to really pass the word to the hero who is joining us from South Africa. And we are moving into our next bit of part. Paul, thank you for joining. How are you? We don't hear you.
I'm good. I'm good. Great day here, but warm.
When we spoke with Paul maybe a week or two ago and discussed what kind of session we would like to conduct together, Paul is a very modest person, maybe because he knows so much, like Socrates. He says, now I don't know anything. But Paul has had a tremendous experience in many different countries, working on developmental projects, and now he resides, as I said, in South Africa, near Cape Town, right?
Right.
On a beautiful, actually, land, which I've never been to South Africa, but definitely the pictures always look very, very inspiring. And the reason we asked Paul to be sort of the hero of this session today is because being a regular Earthling, a regular citizen of our planet, Paul really manifests himself in many creative and extraordinary ways. But as a sort of shy person, he doesn't really he doesn't so much like to talk about himself. He talks about all the other people and all the projects around the globe. But today, we really want to focus at least half of our time to understand why such a person is on the planet and why he spends so much time creating various beautiful books about city development or social development or consciousness development, right? What triggers him? What motivates you in this case? And then we'll also talk, of course, about the latest book Paul has put together. It's called Down to Earth, and it's part of a large series of books called UrbanHub. So it's books about cities in a way and how people live in the cities, how they connect with nature, many other things. So Paul, after this brief introduction, is there anything about yourself you would like to share before I start asking all the questions?
Oh, really? We came out here to Cape Town, or near Cape Town, just before COVID, and we kind of, my one son lives here now, and we came out here and we kind of stuck. So we're here, yeah, it's a very, very different society from anywhere I've lived around the world, and beginning to sort of try and put some of the things going on here into future books, which will probably come out in the next few months. And yeah.
Thank you. When you said that you settled down in Cape Town, where did you come from? What was your prior location of?
Well, I was born here. I was born in Natal, which is further up the coast. And my parents left when I was 13. They sort of, it was getting a bit politically hot for anybody who was against that government. So they decided they didn't want their kids brought up here. So we went to England. So I did all my secondary education, university in England. And I practiced there for a while. And then Barbara, my wife, and I decided, no, we wanted to see the world. So we started, but not just traveling. We wanted to actually be in places long enough. So we started looking for jobs in different countries. And the first one that turned up was actually back in Lesotho, which is a kind of a landlocked state within South Africa. We stayed there 4 years. And then we just kept moving. And we really stopped moving, I suppose, when we came here 4 years ago. So up until then, we've been just living in different countries, working in different countries, and mostly very enjoyable. It's very hard at times, but enjoyable.
Out of all the cities or places which you visited for your professional, activities or on a personal basis, which places stood out in your perception as sort of being more alive and more vibrant, more flourishing? And what are your takeaways just from your personal experience? Why some cities are more alive and others much less so?
Well, my answer to that is quite a curious one, because in fact, it would probably be where I felt most alive, and was Kathmandu. But Kathmandu, and we were there in the 80s, and it was vibrant, and it was poor. I mean, it's poor, but it's very vibrant, and people on the whole were quite happy. The city was a mess as always. We went back 4 years ago, and the heart connection with it is still incredibly strong, but the city itself is a mess. But the minute you get out of the city, you're in the mountains, and that's, I think, people bring that together. But on the whole, people live happily and function happily. But there's corruption, there's bad traffic, there's pollution, and yet somehow it works. And I think this is interesting. But probably the one that worked, which was the most comfortable, I mean, which was the most vibrant, was probably, I really don't know. I mean, so many of them are sort of not too bad. Not sure. I think each one had something to offer. Each one had aspects which were positive and negative. I think we spent time in Barcelona, very vibrant, very alive, and even more so now that they've got this new scheme going. Love London, but only central London, because of the others, and it just sprawls forever. And that's one of the things in the book was about the 15-minute city, is how places like London could become, and in fact already is, a bunch of villages, and how these villages can connect, and each of them become, a center in itself. Yeah, we lived in Thimphu in Bhutan, another vibrant city. Not as in its way as pleasant as Kathmandu. It's a very tight community, very locked down community in terms of conservatism and attitude. But yeah, so no one clear answer.
Then how it came about that you started to publish those books in the UrbanHub series? And just for everyone to understand, if you could share what's the process of creating, how you choose the topic, number one, why you do it, how you do it, and what do you see as results of your creative work?
Well, the first book was about, I suppose, 2000 and... Well, the first two books are part of the UrbanHub series, but we're basically looking at the integral theory. And they're not part of the small book series. They're kind of almost textbooks. And then we started working on what we just were setting up the Thrivability Foundation in 2013-14. And we started working with Surrey Council, or Surrey Wildlife Fund. And they started talking about, oh, we must look at building new cities, we must look at building new townships. And they just said, oh, well, we'll build garden cities. And I said, no, there is such a lot of other things out there. Just don't jump to that conclusion. So I produced the first book, which was really, it was an integral theory book on how cities develop and in terms of theory, and then different ideas. And by the time I got to book 5, I was actually kind of showcasing all the different kinds of things I had found. And the books basically come from themselves. They sort of download somehow. And in many ways, the title comes first and then the cover. And then I start searching it. But once you start searching, you find things pop up, but you don't even heard it before. So it's a kind of a process of research. And interestingly enough, that in the latest book, I started using AI to research. And it makes it much easier, much quicker to do, as long as you always check
Right.
what you get out of it. And so basically the ideas sort of just appear, they come of themselves, and each book kind of recommends. And the reason the last book is called Down to Earth is the two books before that, it's particularly the one before that, was very kind of esoteric. And I felt, let's get that down to back to earth, and away from integral theory, away from Gebser and all the other theorists, and look at mud.
So, Paul, you live in a country where they grow a lot of wine, and wine is definitely very much down to earth product. It comes from the earth, right? The grapes.
Right.
And so thinking about what you do, in my perception, when I look at the books which you produce, right, by inviting different authors, action leaders, or collecting information around a specific topic, this is like growing a tree or growing some kind of plant. And when and you, for me, is a sort of a gardener, right? But the gardener of knowledge.
Yeah.
So my question is, again, why do you spend a lot of time to do this? What motivates you, right?
I don't know. I suppose having started the process, I just enjoy it so much. I enjoy the process of research. I enjoy the process of letting things, come to me. They kind of emerge. I enjoy the design and the graphics of them. And then, one of the books was curated by Marilyn, and that was a very interesting process of working with her and bringing, I think, about 20 people together. Another one was done by Paddy, another co-founder, on Integral Africa, and again, that was the same kind of process. And the next two books in the series will be on a community outside Cape Town, which has a wisdom council, and it's working with the different social groups and different races there, and it's very much proactive. So I've asked them to propose the subjects, and then we'll work with them to produce a book. And the other one is just literally a kilometer and a half from where I'm sitting now. There's an informal settlement of probably 50,000 people, mainly immigrants from Malawi and countries north of South Africa. And there's been a football club who's been working with the communities there for the last few years and producing an awful lot of interesting work. The football was there, was used as a way to communicate or to get involved with this informal settlement. So I've asked them also to propose subjects they're dealing with, and the idea of actually taking people to say, look, what works about these, in a sense, they're not quite slums, but they're very close to it, and what doesn't work, what's it like living there, and then putting that with all the positive things that they're doing, so you get kind of a context of that. Because I think very often most of the things we do are very, very Western, very middle class, very comfortable, and we got to deal with, and I mentioned it slightly in Down to Earth about the slums, but I would like to get more into that and showcase that a bit more, but from their point of view, not from a Western point of view of, oh, we must make these better, but what is their ideas about it? So let them, in a sense, generate the subjects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, South Africa is a strange country. It's got a pretty bad history, but it's, in a sense, it had a very racist past. But racism is a problem just about everywhere. And here, in a sense, it's because of the past. It's so upfront that it's something which is dealt with on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of inherent what's the word I want? The fact that the white community has been living here all the time, so the money is there, because that is where they sort of have. They would say it was always them who were educated, them who were. Now that's slowly changing, but the system is very strong still. I mean, if you look around, you'll find that the system is geared to money, and money is what's really is run by the original white communities here. So those things will change, I'm sure, but it'll take a long time. It's also a country which is quite corrupt, and we have very big energy problems. At 4 o'clock, the power will go off for 4 hours, and people who can afford it are putting batteries in, solar energy. So those kind of things are kind of going to get into the books, but again, it's not something I kind of pre-plan. It's something which comes to me, and sometimes people sort of say, well, what about this? I mean, I'm so happy if somebody says, I'd love to curate a book. I say, right, I'll do it with you. But so far I have only 2.
It's very interesting. When I listen to you and in some of our conversations as well, I get a sense that you like to be in the flow. Sometimes you are aware of the sort of higher, let's call it, capacity of the mind through different practices, traditions, etc. So on one hand, you're very much connected to those more subtle levels of human experience. But on another hand, I see that you're a very practical person. You set a goal, it might come to you sort of from above, but you set a goal to create a book, you make research, you connect to people, and you do everything on time in a very sort of high quality fashion, etc. So to me, it's relatively, I rarely see people who combine both of those worlds. There are many people who are sort of very practical. There are quite a few more and more people who are experiencing those high realms of human experience, but very few connect those two. How does it happen in your life?
I think it's partly age as well. You know, I'm no longer working in the sense of jobs. I started life as an architect, and I suppose maybe half of my life was working in architecture, very much in the development world. And then I moved on to running education teams, and we were in Kathmandu and Bhutan, and you're very much exposed to Buddhism. So that developed. I mean, we've always had a very strong sense of spirit, and I'll use it in that sense. Both Barbara and I, when we were young and as we grew up. But after Bhutan, I went to Bangladesh and worked there with the World Bank and then with UNICEF. And with UNICEF, we connected with Ken Wilber. And it was kind of a good time to connect, because I was kind of a bit disillusioned with what was happening. And Ken kind of revitalized me in terms of his writing. And so for quite a period, maybe for the next 15 years, I was very much working with Ken's integral theory. We went to Boulder. We were part of the setting up the International Integral Institute, which never kind of really flourished. I suppose that spiritual side was always strongly there. And what I've realized as I got older is that conceptual part of integral theory, and that includes spiral dynamics and all that, is very much still of what Gepser would call the mental mutation, because it's conceptual still. Once you move into the integral mutation in his sense, then you can no longer, there's no diagrams, there's no so I spend a lot of my time outside the diagrams and just being, but then I come back and work with my books, which are very conceptual, very diagrammatic. So it's kind of, you know, you have to flow between the two. How and why, I don't know. Just maybe living experience.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Integral Institute, which I visited Ken in Boulder, so I spoke with him, and I see the work of Integral Institute on the website. So I've never met people who organize those activities. And if I understand correctly, you mentioned that it has never flourished, right?
Well, it's interesting, because one of the things I set up with Gail was the Integral Without Borders, and that we ran for a long time, and Maryland's on the board of that. And it went quite well, and then we kind of died down. But the Institute itself really became integral, I think an integral life or integral, it's, you know, it's got,
Yes,
it's
integral life.
not an institute anymore. And that the idea of the institute was that we set up Integral Without Borders as originally as being a part of what was going to be the Integral University, which Ken had the idea of setting up. So we started an Institute of Development Aid, or something, I can't remember the name now. And that never took off. So then we changed that to Integral Without Borders, and then we kind of kept Ken as an advisor, but we went in our own way. That has kind of also gone quiet, and may never wake up again. I don't know. I then set up Integral Mentors at kind of in 2008 because I wanted to do something a little bit different to what Integral Without Borders was doing, and I suppose in a sense, kind of selfishly in a way, in that I wanted to work in certain areas which were that interest me, and that's the case of what I've carried on doing. But as much as possible, where it makes sense, you know, including people, and always, you know, being part of groups, but also, you know, at times being quite a hermit, sort of keeping away from things, just reading, thinking. So yeah, the Integral Institute kind of for me, I mean, and even the association with Ken kind of has been very, very tenuous. I mean, not tenuous, but it's just faded away. And I've kind of moved a little bit away from that integral theory, Aqua and spiral dynamics, and into more Gebser's areas of work.
Interesting. So I suggest we have about 15 minutes left. I would love to go and if you could be our guide through the book. Of course, people would be able to download it later, but if you could sort of highlight those parts of the book you really feel passionate about or find specifically interesting from some perspective, if we can maybe share the screen, I could do it from my side and browse through it.
Yeah, I'll just before you start that, I think what people must also know is that all the ebooks are free. I mean, you can download them on SlideShare anytime. And I put them on Amazon as well, because I quite like copies of hard copies. But it's the ebooks are available for free.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. So let me open the presentation, and I will quickly go through it. And when you want to comment on one of those specific cases, please stop me. And here we go. Beautiful. I will share my screen. Okay.
Okay, that's. I mean, again, that's the cover that it's. So that shows you what the book is, and that kind of the format, which is quite a small. It's quite a small book. It's that size. That's UrbanHub 5, and it's so that's the cover, and they all seem to have that sort of look to them. And this quickly, just briefly explains what they are about: taste, ideas, theories, graphs, praxis, to spark interest. They're not detailed. They're very often done for people who don't have an understanding of the breadth of it. You know, I just like the quote on that one. That's all. It's a kind of an African one. In order to find our way, you must become lost, generously lost. It is only when you are lost that you can be found by something greater than you. And I think that's, I mean, that's bio, but it's basically an African.
It's interesting. Before we go down the pages of the book, you are the person who introduced bios, you know, presentations and thinking to me, and I found the bio Akamalafi a very enriching, enlightening, and inspiring person. So, how do you got in touch with him? Where did you see him, and how did you learn about his work?
I'm actually not sure how I found him. I think there's another person, Tyson. I can never forget his name. He was an Australian Aboriginal, and I worked in Central Australia with Aboriginal for about 2.5 years. And he wrote a book called, I think it's Sand Talk. And I think from that, there was a mention of bio, or maybe not. And I just started watching and looking and following him. And I just enjoy his writing. He's an activist, he's a disruptor, but a positive disruptor. I just love his writing. He's Nigerian, but he basically lives in India now, I think, in Chennai. But he travels. He's a lecturer. You can't actually get hold of him very easily because he's really busy.
Mm.
But if anybody's wants a little bit of disruption in their lives, to read it, I mean, he writes to me very well, very verbose, but very well.
Wonderful. Okay, so if we move down to the next pages.
Now these ones, what I've said is this UrbanHub 31, which is the down to earth, basically comes out of the last three ones, which is stepping into step out, which is basically going into oneself and then pushing, out into the world. Then 29 was basically taking that stepping out into more detail, and then to go on to 30, and then 30 was looking at Ken Wilber's idea of cosmos, the old idea of cosmos, which is the world of both the inner and the outer. So it takes those and develops them more. And there's an article that Susan Goiter wrote for UrbanHub 23 in there about Weird World, which is the white, I think it's, I remember it has the white, intelligent, educated, rational, whatever it is, which is quite a good view of the integral side of things. And then the bottom two are just the current number of books. That's what's out at the moment. And as I say, they can all be, if anybody's interested, they're all on SlideShare. The first four are more on integral theory and the city, and it developed out of the city and more into thrival. So it went from thrivable cities into thrivable worlds, but there's always a kind of a city connection to it.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of times the service where people could download those books. Could you, by any chance, later write it down, maybe after we're done, so we can share?
I'll send it to you.
Perfect. When I look at your books, what really surprises me is the combination, again, of different parts of our life experience. For example, they're very aesthetically attractive. And sometimes you talk about very mundane things, like how to revive sort of disenfranchised communities. But you have this beautiful graphic. And also the words you use, thrivable worlds, meta-pragmatic approach, entangled cosmos, etc. To me, they open up the whole, universes, not even one, but multiple. And then again, you talk about very minor details and how to do specific steps. So how are you able to pay attention to both the conceptual level and the very sort of rational and pragmatic level?
I don't know. I mean, the starting point was that people don't read. So on the whole, it's not, I can't always keep to it. On the whole, there should never be more than one page, half a page of text on each page. Sometimes we get more, sometimes we get quotes, but I just think having set up the kind of the framework, and I kind of break out it every now and then, that gives it a structure, and then I start just filling it in. If one thing may suggest another thing, or I may come across something, I want to put that in. And I often repeat things because I think people need to be reminded, that this kind of is important too.
Exactly.
And when I was doing, the next section on, when I call it down to earth, which is to me the very practical part of this book, on page that one, I basically started looking at, I wanted to do earth architecture, and then I realized, of course, timber is earth, bamboo is earth, and then there was this interesting little competition that was done in Africa about, it's mainly houses, and just the kind of creativity coming out of this place. I think it was more, not so much South Africa, but further north, was just mind-boggling. I had not realized how much people are getting into that there. And then this Yemen one now, it's just the most incredible place. So I've just put these in, to give people tasters, to give people ideas. And further down, there's a hospital in Nepal, which could only be built out of, as I say, rammed earth, mud, because it's so far from Kathmandu. It's there's nothing on site. And I mean, when I built a school in Bhutan, up in in one of the valleys, and we basically mined the site for rocks and stones, things like that, to build the walls and things like that. So it's that kind of thing where you're just using what you find. Then the timber one was interesting, because I always thought this timber would be a good reusable or recyclable or sustainable substance. But in fact, they're saying now that mass timber, we make everything out of timber, is very unsustainable because it's just used so much. So everything you use has to be used with the care of what is it? Is it sustainable, or is it like this one it's on show now, that would not be sustainable in the long run, because there's just so much timber. Everybody did that. Whereas the bamboo goes those ones, which are quite beautiful, I think, and that one's in Bali, are just much more so. So using earth materials, using natural materials in itself can be problematic. So these need to be looked at as well as you do it. So I went from this very down to earth topic to start looking at areas in which cities are flooding, and that's the next section, where I just said, there's no one solution. Everybody on that list, and that's just a short list, has their concepts, and this is a thing they're pushing. But each one of those has a place. Each one of those should be seen, and each one must be then adjusted, changed to the context of your own place. You can't take them as a template. You can only take them as an idea. And how do you use that idea? The one I found very interesting was the middle one, the Soulful City, which I think is the next one. Yeah, it's in Edmonton, which is that they didn't come to it from the point of view of making a happy or thrivable city. They come from the point of view of wellness, and very much also being aware of indigenous, what they call First People. So, and how you let them determine, rather than how you, as a top-down way. And I think so. There's work on there, but there is a lot of. If people get interested in that sort of thing, then there are some links to sites, or you just Google it and you'll find it nowadays, or Bing it, whatever you do that. But if you look at the next page, you'll see, they spent some time doing it, they didn't do it. They got an individual's framework done by the people involved themselves. And there's a whole little booklet on that in there, that you can download and read about. And some of the books we looked at other cultures, Australian Aboriginal cultures, Yoruba, African, Blackfoot, just to get people to realize that when you actually look at something like spiral dynamics, people tend to place some of these earlier religions in those first stages of development, and they're not. I mean, if you start to look, Gepser calls them structures, not stages, because there is an incredible wisdom there. And if you could only understand it, if you come from that point of view, not from a Western point of view. Anyhow, you can go on. The 15-minute city, I think, is an interesting concept. I think it started in Colombia or somewhere in South America, and the Paris took it on board, and Barcelona and many places. And they're like everything else, there are issues with that as well. So what one has to realize is that, how do you make it work for you in each city? If that concept has meaning, then how does it work? And there's the next slide, I think, or the one this person has looked at it from the London point of view, showing both the problems and the solutions. And so it's important that all these things can exist. Even in one region, you could have any one of these going at the same time. So it's just don't get stuck on a concept, get stuck on a broad palette of things that you could work on, and then develop your own. And I think that's what LCE is doing, is setting, you know, a portfolio of things and tools and things like that, but which then must be used by the people themselves to determine what they want and what they're going to do with it.
Interesting. When I look at all those cases, each one of them required a lot of energy from local leaders, from business, government, social sort of organizations. Throughout creating this UrbanHub series, have you had experience of talking to people who created all those different cases? And
not on these ones. These ones I just researched them.
Right.
Because I thought, but and many of the sort of earlier ones, when I was working in the field, then we would had lots of experience of talking to them. And I mean, particularly to me the most fascinating was working in Central Australia with Australian Aboriginals, where we were advisors to the communities, and you would basically sit in the creek for a day or two and talk to them, and they would tell you what. And it was always what they wanted, and it was interesting because when they first started work, the Australian government built them 3-bedroom houses with electric cookers, and in no time they wrecked them. And the theory, so everybody said, "Oh, well, look at these terrible people," but it's not what they wanted. And in the end, we found that they wanted simple shelters. They didn't live in a house; they wanted to live in a shelter. They wanted a shelter where they could basically store their tools and their weapons, and then they go wandering around the desert. It's different in different places in Australia too, but it's that concept of actually letting people determine what they want to do, and not ever thinking maybe we know best, because we don't.
It's very interesting. A couple of questions I wanted to ask you. They relate to other sort of next sessions we'll have today and tomorrow. One of them is on leadership. What kind of leaders we would need, or what kind of leaders create improvements in the world, create better world for all of us? And from your experience, are there any common threads in those people who really make all those beautiful cases happen?
I think the interesting thing to me is that you need different leaders for different parts of anything you do. I mean, you need people who are going to hold visions and share visions, and these will be a mixture of people from outside and people from inside. But you need, in the end, you also need leaders who will actually get things developed. I mean, it's in a sense, I learned that in architecture, where you would have architects producing lovely schemes, and then they say, okay, now we must build it. And if you left it to the designer and the conceptual person to build it, it always seemed to mess up. So you had different leaders for that. And I think it's the same with all these things. There are different leaders for different things. And it's important that we understand that. And in the spiral dynamic term, you need a leader who's not too far up that scale if they on working with people, because what we did have with Integral Borders, we had problems in Nigeria where we brought some people in, and they were, in spiral dynamics term, green, and the community was orange, and there was no connection. So it's leadership. There's no one leadership. I find different people, very ordinary people leading very successfully, very intelligent, educated leaders leading very badly. So it's not easy. But I think the most thing is a sense of being humble. If you don't, in fact, even if you're an expert, still being humble.
It's very interesting. Next couple of sessions, I see that Pavel Luksha joined us, and we will speak with him about the future trends and what the future might be for our planet, and how can we participate in actually co-creating the future, and what does it mean to be an evolutionary leader. So maybe my last question to you, Paul, before we finish in 1 minute: do you consider yourself an evolutionary leader?
Not really, no. I now consider myself as a publisher.
You're being very humble.
I think now I enjoy making these books and publishing.
It's very interesting.
They will lead wherever they lead, but I myself am not a leader.
It's
Not
amazing.
now.
When Marilyn Hamilton first spoke to me about you, the way she described you, it was very sort of inspiring. And when I got to know you a little bit, of course, I got inspired even more. And all the amazing experiences in your life and how you created this project and that project and worked worldwide. Now you're working on those UrbanHub series. To me, truly, you are one of the sort of exemplary evolutionary leaders. And as you said, what leaders need to be is to be humble, because it's not only that they do something, right, but it's been done through them.
Yeah,
and we'll speak
absolutely.
with Pavel about those issues. But I would like, Paul, very much to thank you for your amazing contribution to humanity and all life on Earth. You are really an inspiration to many people. I would kindly ask you to send the link so we can distribute it, where people could download the latest book, Down to Earth, as well as the prior books in the series. And again, thank you for taking time in your busy
Thank
life.
you.
And
I think you're doing an incredible job, Lev, as a leader. So keep it up.
Thank you, thank you. I'm not as humble as you, but I'm learning.
Oh, of course you are.
You'll have some time to do this. Thank you, Paul. And
Okay.
wow, you have made it. You just watched amazing insights from experts of Living Cities Earth ecosystem. We welcome you to the Living Cities Earth experience and hope that we are going for a long ride as we take care of ourselves, our communities, our cities, and our planet. Thank you and welcome.